I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. You may still be thinking about the first weeks of the new school year, but public finance folks, the people who work on budgets, are at this moment thinking about their 2026 proposals. Come November, December, these proposals will drop for public and legislative consideration. Many jurisdictions now seek public participation in their budget process. Some say it is window dressing, while others believe bottom up budgeting can solve the failings of the current budget system at the local level. Selena Sue is the Marilyn J. Gittle Chair in Urban Studies at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, as well as Professor of Political Science at Brooklyn College. Her newest book, Budget Justice, on building grassroots politics and solidarities, came out from Princeton University Press this week, and she joined me to discuss the book and the challenges of bottom up budgeting. I know, it is budgeting, but don't forget that we also say budgets are moral documents. At a time when Zoran Mamdani has shown how to turn local politics sideways, if not upside down, a budget discussion on the efficacy of public participation in politics is, to my mind, exciting. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning, precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Drew Pictures and the Lead Extras, an indie pop rock band based in Rockville, Maryland. Andrew Glore on vocals and keys, Brian Wolf on guitar, and Josh Wilson on drums. The songs come from their album Cats on Santorini. You can find their music at drewpicturesmusic.com. Selena Sue, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you. I actually don't hate being here. I'm really excited to be here. Sorry, too earnest, but I'll go with it.
Go for it. Congratulations on your new book, Budget Justice, on building grassroots politics and solidarities. For one of your chapters, you have even used Washington, D.C.'s motto, no taxation without representation. So even though the book is not from here, it seems like it applies here. The book is not just about budgets, but has the ambition of trying to find a different approach to grassroots politics and power. Now, the central claim of democracy is that it is participatory, even if imperfectly so. How is participatory budgeting different as a practice of democracy from the past?
The term participatory budgeting refers to a specific process that began in the 1990s in Brazil after their military dictatorship. And it is a process in which everyday folks who are not elected officials, get together and help to make decisions on how to allocate their local public budget, whether it's their public school budget or in most cases, their citywide budget. So that's really different from our main mode of participation being in the voting booth. Through the 1990s, this process spread through Brazil and then Latin America. And then in the past couple of decades, it's spread to, I think, over 11,000 cities around the world. In the US, not by coincidence, it started around the same time as Occupy Wall Street.
How is this assembly chosen?
It could be a town hall forum type scenario where it's whoever can show up, and that already can exclude people. So if it's a really well done process, it has decent outreach in different languages. In the case of New York City, we saw from, say, year 2 to year 3 that a few hundred extra dollars spent by the city to do outreach and flyers in different languages led to different people showing up. So that's why I'm not giving you a straightforward answer in terms of who shows up, because it's all according to how it's done. And every few dollars makes a difference. Whether you provide food makes a difference. Whether you have the assembly in a school cafeteria, on which side of the tracks, in which neighborhoods, how many of them you have, whether you have quote unquote pop-up ones, which are just a table set up in front of the supermarket on a Sunday to gather ideas, is of course different people are going to show up from an official town hall forum or assembly on a Thursday evening when people might have to hire childcare in order to attend.
Given the process that you just described and the self-selection that is involved, why would that process also not be taken over by those who hold power anyway?
That's a challenge and a contradiction we have to grapple with. It's a real question. It might even be the main question. Interestingly, in New York, at least, that's not exactly what happened. We found that when people have a chance to participate in ways where they feel like their participation might make a difference, they do so. We found that 1 out of every 4 said that they weren't eligible to vote in regular elections. And lower income New Yorkers were disproportionately represented. At least that first participation paradox, where those who have the most benefit tend to participate the least, that one somehow got addressed. But then there was a subsequent big question of participation for what? Did they make a difference?
Now, participatory budget was itself $1 million per council member, right? Is that correct?
Yes. So it was discretionary money.
It was a really small number relative to the $116 billion New York City annual budget. I'm wondering if the numbers are so small that the powerful just don't care and are not even going to that venue at this point. But if that number should become larger, that at that point they will start to intervene.
That's one of the key lessons of how, when participatory budgeting, which folks usually shorten as PB, traveled around the world, it really lost its oomph and its power. You know, in Porto Alegre in Brazil, when it was first implemented, it was part of a larger change in governance and government. And they closed a lot of the other ways in which local groups, whether they're service providers like soup kitchens or schools, usually help to negotiate with local elected officials to make decisions, so that everybody had to go through PB, and it was a much larger chunk of the budget. So it lowered infant mortality. Here, it feels like it's tiny projects that get funded through PB. So The only way in which I feel like it's making a bit of a difference here is through whether you call them ripple effects or spillover effects. It serves as a form of political education. Then maybe you can do something more.
I thought it was going to be reversed. So, because it's smaller, the powerful have left that venue alone. As the pot for PB grows, that you will actually have the more powerful come back into the venue because there's real money at stake. And so I am wondering if the best chance for PB is a small budget, and a small budget you can make that much difference. So we are stuck in it almost becomes a method for co-opting the disaffected.
It's a smart system. This is a very cynical take. A smart system for letting people let off steam and co-opt them and tell them that they're being empowered to, in some participants' words, just allocate the equivalent of bake sale proceeds to see which DJ they should hire at the prom. That's not changing the school budget. You hinted that perhaps because it's such a small pot of money, the powerful are letting it be. In some ways, that's true. They've managed it and limited it so much that they're not threatened by it. But we're living under such austerity that city agencies have come to local residents' assemblies saying, oh, you have $1 million. Here's a chance to make up for some of our budget cuts from last year. So instead of you telling us what you need and which intersections feel dangerous and what additional programming perhaps your school needs, we are coming to you with hyper local researched projects that are almost done, but then didn't get done because of budget cuts. Here's bang for your buck. Here's our expertise being put to use. And we have a ready menu for you to choose from, which just re-emphasizes the role of citizens as nothing but consumers choosers.
So how do you get all of this right?
To the extent that PB has made a difference in New York, it's not necessarily a heartening lesson because it just shows how low the bar is, that them finding out how government works, how city agencies work, who they should be going to deal with flash floods. It's partly that they learned more information through PB, which just shows how opaque and non-transparent politics usually is to them. So one of the key tensions that we found in New York was that city agency representatives just really didn't necessarily want to work in this sort of democratic way. They really felt like they were well-trained technocrats with good intentions, a lot of experience, a lot of expertise working under duress. And why should they also work with these community members in these new ways? One of the chief complaints of participants in PB in New York was that they felt like many of their projects were ultimately rejected because of technicalities, because they said, oh, a green roof on the school building would be great, but it's not that it's not feasible exactly. It's that specific school building is co-owned by this other agency. And so technically we can't do it. They have so much technical expertise. Why are we as everyday citizens spending time researching through government records who exactly is the owner of this to get a simple thing done?
If you are going to ask somebody else to do it for you, we know that they will rent seek from it. I mean, that's the entire point of public choice.
So then it's interesting that it didn't always play out that way. Certainly, we saw rent seeking in PB, for sure, especially in schools. It felt like well organized upper middle class or upper income PTAs could easily commandeer a lot of votes for school projects so that we started to implement rules such as, schools that have a project on the PB ballot should not become voting sites. But then, given all this, it's interesting that rent seeking didn't always occur, that we saw plenty of cases in which people, for the first time, talked to people unlike themselves, and they would often retract their own campaign and say, oh, I'm going to help you with yours. Like people who were trying to figure out a playground renovation for their kid found out that, oh, these elderly neighbors also are looking for fitness equipment, and they work together with playground designers for the first time to address these needs.
What separates the cases where you did not have rent seeking versus cases where you had rent seeking? It worked better in Porto Alegre in Brazil and not so well in New York. In New York itself, some success stories and not some. If you made that comparison, what would you find?
One key one is regarding publics. Porto Alegre had the sort of public that helped to topple a military dictatorship. We're reweaving the social fabric, whatever metaphor we want to use, and Porto Alegre had it. And in the years since, PB has floundered there, and they've seen the rise of Bolsonaro, and some of the local political scientists and activists have conjectured that it's partly because they lost their connections to social movements. And here we're starting from scratch, and this is often the first conversation that some of the public housing residents have had with their non-public housing resident neighbors. The other thing is a techno-democracy, that in the US, so much of the energy ends up going to developing quote unquote feasible projects rather than just articulating needs and letting the technical experts figure out the details. And I would also say that you can't do it on the cheap. You need decent facilitators that allow different people to talk. Working collectively is a really different kind of politics.
I have been in many of these meetings, and to date, I can say I have not found a good facilitator. All of them I go to, and I feel like I wasted my time.
Yeah. So voice but no power.
Voice and no purpose.
A lot of what drove me to write this book was the question of participation for what? I want more participation. Sure, when we have taxation without representation and taxation without participation, we know that something is being withheld from us. The last thing we want is guilt tripping people who are facing an affordability crisis and everything else to take time out to attend meetings that go nowhere.
Actually, the last thing we want is for the venue organizers to pretend that this is an economic problem and look down upon people that cannot attend in the name that they have two jobs or they can't bring their kids or whatever it is. Nothing is more false than that, because the same parent will drive 2 hours from Montgomery County into Virginia to take their kids on a weekday for a soccer game. The same parent, but won't come to a PTA meeting. I used to be PTA president. During my tenure, I lowered the PTA fee from $20, $25 a year to $5. You know what the effect was? Zero. If you live here in Montgomery County, $25 a year is not really an imposition.
No.
But they pretend that it is. That all the people that organize these venues are saying that this group of people can't do it, that group of people can't do it. They don't want to do it because there's no value in doing it for them. In that case, have you thought about PB meetings in a different way, such that they don't devolve into this valueless exercise of voice without purpose.
I have some critiques of how some of the innovations and oomph of PB get lost when city council staff or city government staff um, think of participation only as voting, the last stage of PB, but because they're most used to GOTV, get out the vote efforts as notions of outreach, and they put a lot fewer resources into facilitators and basic resources for the deliberation part. Ideally, what it does is it makes meetings fun and meaningful. And these are skills that are lost. And so for a lot of adults, so they can feel intimidating. In the New York City PB process, there are these PB project, quote unquote, expo science fairs where they put together pictures of as simple as a school bathroom that needs renovating. Here's some bad photos of the disrepair to something different. Like one of the PB projects that got funded was a study of bats in Prospect Park, which a local biologist knew about. And it's like super understudied. The rest of us didn't, even though we all know this park and they had random facts. There are a surprisingly large percentage of all mammals in the world, etc. To self-defense by and for South Asian Muslim women in the Kensington neighborhood, to meetings of what default decent contracts adapted to the local context should look like between nannies and parents. So it wasn't a formal labor union, but they're like, oh, we can get a group of a dozen or so parents and a dozen or so local nannies to talk about what a first template of what they think good local norms that most of us parents usually get through local listservs anyway, what they should look like. These are some examples, but these adults, even from the ones who are auto mechanics or street vendors or janitors during the day, to the ones who are lawyers during the day, they all expressed that they didn't know how to put these science poster boards together. They're like, oh, I haven't done this since sixth grade. And so people are not used to connecting in simple language necessarily with people they're not friends with. And so we had art fairs where there were like artists ready to help glue photos onto the science boards, etc. And then they stood in front of these science boards at the local expos where people could talk to the people who developed the project ideas that ended up on the ballot to just learn more about different ideas.
Do you believe you're fighting an institutional problem, or do you believe you're fighting a social problem, perhaps of nihilism, of enemy?
Both. I think that the seduction of despair and cynicism runs deep and it's everywhere. And that's a social problem. But I don't think institutions make it easy to get out of it because there are people who currently hold a lot of power who benefit from the current system. So that's an institutional problem.
You say in your book that participatory budgeting is as much about investments as it is about disinvestment. We know that government programs create their own constituencies. So, when you present the case of where you want to invest means also where you want to disinvest, the disinvestment decision is much harder because there's a group of people, sometimes very deserving, that benefit. What has been the experience in New York or elsewhere that you have studied that speaks to we don't need to do this anymore? And what happens to the conflict that arises from that decision?
PB is not very good on its own at addressing that because, for the most part, it's foreclosed questions of raising revenues or divestment. at least in the US case. There are these other campaigns, often called people's budget campaigns, that are trying to recast this question to start to address what you're talking about. And I've been in conversations with some folks from Los Angeles who helped to get legislation called Measure J legislation passed. And they also surveyed a lot of people who said that Measure J legislation is trying to, in some ways, to divest from the carceral system to invest in more care services. But even amongst folks who sort of agree, they don't want to put the divest language in the forefront of the messaging. They focus on what they want to invest on and hope that it's somehow that the divestment is implicit. In New York, people who want to think about divestments try to point out specific cases like robot dogs for 750,000 or 240 million last year for police malpractice lawsuit settlements. Some divestment decisions are hard. Many of them are hard, but they're not asking for wholesale divestment so much as asking for more transparency.
Historically, the way we have solved this problem is to say, okay, we don't need to divest. We will just grow the pie. And that is also a preferred solution for many, many. People talk about win-win all the time. But today we have a real climate emergency. And growing the pie has a real cost in terms of climate. Growing the pie is not available to us today as it used to be in the 1960s. Do people really care about climate change in this context, that they realize that if they don't divest, that they can't keep on growing?
I don't know. I see people all over the place. I definitely see generational differences. This is a little bit more anecdotal. This is not exactly what I study, but I definitely, just personally amongst my students and colleagues, see real generational differences. But then there's plenty of young people who are just buying fast fashion all the time.
Exactly. We haven't talked anything about Barcelona, which is also a big case study for you. Are there lessons you would like to draw from Barcelona?
Investments in the so-called solidarity economy make a difference.
Explain solidarity economy.
Anything that you do that you could pay someone to do, but that's not the current arrangement or setup, like a carpool, you could hire a driver to drive your kid to school 3 days a week. But instead, you have another arrangement: worker cooperatives, community land trusts, community gardens, grocery stores that are food cooperatives. I'm part of a food cooperative where we all work 2 hours and 45 minutes in shifts every 6 weeks. And that means that the prices are really low. Milk that is $7 elsewhere will be $4 or $3 or $4 at my local grocery store. And also during COVID, the membership decided what their COVID protocols would look like. So it's not perfect. All the stereotypes about social experiments still hold true. There's still people who are much too officious and people who are annoying. But then it's just interesting to try to get things done by cooperating rather than competing. Invest in solidarity economy experiments to have because they can make a real economic impact with a model that's not purely about competition and capital. Also, you can raise revenues. Their tourist tax and their different taxes made a difference in increasing their social housing budget by double-digit percentages. And finally, that they said that they still had to pay attention to politics. that they try to help people participate. So they set their budget priorities through neighborhood assemblies that were held outdoors, et cetera, not exactly through a participatory budgeting process, more just through popular assemblies. But you can't institutionalize norms in a single administration. And after one or two administrations of implementing these sorts of changes, they lost an election. So, and then the next administration is trying to roll back on a lot of their policy changes.
Is that common?
I'm not sure it's that common. I think that even in Barcelona, the new administration is facing what you alluded to earlier, that new entitlements build new constituencies. And so people are not about to let new programs that they enjoy get taken away from them. It depends on how much power they built.
Do you think your book is a defense of politics itself?
I hadn't thought of it that way necessarily, but yes. I think for me personally, it's partly a reflection of the difference. I think contestation and politics can be engaging, can be something that we don't hate, can make a difference, because I don't think people are apathetic. I think people are disillusioned and disempowered. Maybe it's partly because I don't know how to deal with psychological states as much as active structural processes. But disillusioned and disempowered means that there are actual processes of disillusionment and disempowerment going on. And it's not easy to figure out who's doing what, but there's something there to change.
Selena Sue, thank you. Congratulations again on your new book, Budget Justice, on building grassroots politics and solidarities.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analysis. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Drew Pictures and the Lead Extras, an indie pop rock band based in Rockville, Maryland. Andrew Glore on vocals and keys, Brian Wolf on guitar, and Josh Wilson on drums. The songs come from their album Cats on Santorini. You can find their music at drewpicturesmusic.com. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
I'm your mirror, mirror hanging on the wall.